He quickly laughed out loud to relieve the situation and announced the end of the test. The top students would soon be announced. Burden gulped in fear. His father also silently accepted the results. As expected, the group of students of school number 5, Rayon Ziegert, Sylvia and Helen, sitting in the stands could not hold back their tears of happiness. Their anxiety had disappeared. People around Rayon were whispering and couldn't believe he could do this. Burden shouted loudly against the results in front of everyone. He did not believe what the teacher said. Rimmer was bewildered and did not understand. Burden patted his chest and said he was superior in every way and could not accept that Rayon was ranked first. He was angry and blamed it all, saying it was all a bad joke. The stands also began to shake, and the teachers below folded their arms helplessly in the face of nonsense talk. Burden pointed to Rayon to decide on a confrontation. Rimmer curled up the corner of his mouth. Do you want the top position that much? Burden was heartbroken by what he said, blushing and immediately denying it. Rimmer laughed loudly and looked at the Lord, asking what to do. Glenn was silent, then came down from above and asked Rayon if she wanted to talk to someone who didn't agree with the results. Burden smiled sinisterly behind him, but Rayon flatly refused to offer to fight, much to everyone's surprise. The test is over. I refuse to fight because I won't gain anything. Rayon turned sarcastic when Burden kept saying he was of legitimate lineage but lost miserably. He blushed angrily, but there was nothing he could do. Glenn tells Rayon to join the fight and gives him a bronze card instead. Rayon's eyes lit up at the reward just mentioned. The Ziergast clan will award gold, silver and bronze cards depending on each person's achievements. Each card corresponds to a different reward. Even if it's just a bronze card, you'll earn something. Rayon nodded in understanding and agreed. Glenn put his hand on his chin and announced the start. Rayon and Burden looked at each other with 4 eyes, no one giving in. This is a one-round duel. Whoever uses aura will be eliminated and will only be allowed to use their body. Rimmer raised his hands high and shouted loudly to begin. Burden's sharp fist rushed forward as fast as the wind. Rayon carefully avoided it, making him miss his first punch. The man raised his foot again and was stopped by his hand, his rayon hair falling down and his eyes looking steadily at the enemy. Burden angrily used the tiger fist that his father had taught him because there was no rule prohibiting the use of boxing, so it was not considered a violation. Then he swung it forward, causing rocks to scatter everywhere, and the surrounding students were contentedly chatting about the story. That bitter Burden, a weak person of equal lineage, dares to compete for my first-class position. Remembering the time when his brother was cruelly thrown away by his father, his expectations for him made him even more determined. He thrust his fist forward, determined to prove himself to everyone. But those punches were all easily avoided by Rayon. He opened his eyes wide and discovered that he could see each fist and his opponent's rhythm. All the attacks were clear before his eyes. Burden shouted like crazy, gathered all his strength to prepare for the decisive blow, then jumped up to attack from the air. Rayon revealed her eyes as she put all her strength into her hands and aimed straight ahead. 2 fists from both sides touched each other, creating a strong golden impact that radiated in all directions. Rayon quickly threw another punch at him, the fire ring covering the steel punch from its owner's hand. Burden stammered in fear and looked towards his fallen arm. Rayon took advantage of the opening and delivered a super powerful blow to the opponent. The fallen enemy jumped away from the calmness enveloped by the fire ring. Burden rolled his eyes and spat water in a very pathetic way. His father and everyone sitting in the stands panicked when the tiger fist was defeated. Only the Lord kept a cold face from beginning to end. Burden knelt down panting, his hands empty on the ground, asking why he knew how to use the tiger right. The other person calmly replied that it was because he taught me, I just imitated him. The royal family and the duke suddenly wondered why Rayon could use the tiger fist, then asked the person next to him if it had been passed down. This is truly an impossible thing. He rubbed his wrists and stood proudly in front of his defeated general. Master Rimmer covered his mouth and exclaimed, Rayon was able to negate the spiral of the tiger fist by creating a fist with the opposing spiral. Just being able to read his opponent's martial arts direction is enough to be called a genius, but he can turn it into his own skill. This was what could stand at the pinnacle of the continent and what Seagard was looking for. Rayon is a true destiny genius. The teacher in charge stepped up to announce the end of the match with a clear result. Mr. Koao took the winner's shoulder and announced the end of today's test. Sylvia and Helen rushed over. Rayon was surprised to see her mother's figure. She ran to hug her son in happiness. Rayon awkwardly smiled and gently supported Sylvia. With tears in her eyes, she hugged her son. The devil hovering behind him was angry. Go home quickly, I'm hungry. Renan was also able to be with her parents after 6 months of being away from practice. Only Burden had to limp while holding his wound and was helped up by the butler. He was suddenly startled by the figure standing in the distance. His father stared intently and then left without mercy. Burden blushed in despair. He watched his father gradually walk away but still did not dare to call back. Night fell over the mansion. Under the light yellow candlelight, Burden stood with his head bowed before his father. He sat with his back turned, not even looking at his son who failed miserably. Burden was so scared and speechless that he was startled by his father's call. Do you remember what I told you? Father told me to return as the top rookie and not lose to anyone. His father turned slightly back, yelling at his useless son for humiliating him. He was scared and didn't want to be like his two brothers. His first chance was ruined by him. Father turned around and pressed for the position of leader during the graduation ceremony, then cruelly chased his son away. Burden walked in the darkness, afraid of leaving the Zirgot family. He punched hard into the solid stone wall next to him. My whole body trembled with anger because the person who defeated me was useless. As he walked, he swore that he would definitely take revenge in the future. Walking aimlessly in the dark night, he covered his eyes in surprise when he reached the door of the training house. He frowned whether this was unconscious or not. Burden opened the door and walked in. Looking around, there was no one but only training equipment. He picked up the dumbbell and stared at it, then turned his eyes to the other side. In front of you is the student's locker, and in your eyes is the enemy's locker, Rayon. He gently walked to the side of the cabinet, gently opened it, telling himself to just take a look. As soon as he opened the closet, he was startled because what he saw was a box of dozens of used shoes. Burden picked up his shoes and looked a bit sad because he had only changed his shoes twice, and what he saw was more than 10 pairs. Surprised, he looked behind him and saw the image of Rayon practicing every day on the bench, making him watch intently. He realized that Rayon was always practicing, while he was skipping the basics and swinging his sword majestically, or when he was comfortably resting, when Rayon exuded the essence of the Ziegert family. Burden then went and did completely opposite things. He looked helplessly at the old shoes, then looked back at the pair of dumbbells lying still on the floor, then looked at the shoes in his hand and gently opened the cabinet to keep them in their original place. The shoes lay still in the old closet. Burden walked out of the training room into the night. He looked up at the sky with a determined expression. In Rayon's room, he was opening the system when Ma Tun stood next to him and kept talking. I've lived for thousands of years but have never met anyone like you. What are you? Rayon sat leisurely on the bed without a trace of Ma Tun's question. The system displayed that the bet had been won. Snowflower's 1-star intuition had been created. All skill points increased by 2. The ability has the ability to increase the range of human awareness. Now it's only 1 star, so it can still increase by 10%, evolving to have 10 times more awareness than the original. Rayon wondered about Snowflower's strange intuitive name. He left and sarcastically mocked Ma Tun's strange naming method, who was really bad at naming. Ma Tun's dissatisfaction echoed throughout the night. In the morning, Sylvia was standing and talking to her son when the butler interrupted the conversation. Both turned to look at him with curiosity. Sylvia wondered if she had done something wrong, but the butler sent a message to comfort the young lady not to worry. He only wanted to say that the patriarch wanted to personally give the bronze card to the young master. Glenn sat on his throne with his hand on his chin, standing next to the butler who held the Ziegard family's bronze card in his hand. Rayon respectfully knelt before the Lord. Glenn, looking a bit bored, kept his promise and ordered the person next to him to take down the bronze card. The bronze card reflects the dazzling sunlight, a hexagonal-shaped body made of bronze engraved in the middle with a knight's sword. Rayon looks at his achievements. When he returns the card later, the owner will receive a corresponding item or favor. He stared and then immediately said, "Now I have a request." Glenn was surprised because his nephew decided quite quickly, right after just receiving the family card. "What do I need to do to regain my mother Sylvia Zeegard's position?" The Lord and Butler paused at that question. He lowered his face to express gratitude for Sylvia's direct position. Rayon looked at her grandfather in confusion because of his displeased expression. Lord Zeegard said it was possible if he achieved something that the whole family recognized, but it wasn't that simple. He picked up his card and looked at it, then smiled at the patriarch because there was still hope. Rayon put the card back in the butler's hand and turned to leave. The patriarch called back and said he could still give him a satisfactory answer. Rayon paused, not expecting to hear these words from the King of Destruction in the north. Glenn asked his nephew to state his wishes. He clenched his fists and thought about what he needed most: cultivation techniques. That will be taught at the beginning of basic training. But what Rayon needed was something more technical than that. He proposed a cultivation technique commensurate with the bronze card he had received. The technique of cultivating the aura of darkness in the previous life was not enough. To restore Sylvia's position and behead Darius, aura appeared and became even stronger. The patriarch seriously snapped his fingers. Below Rayon's feet appeared a white door opening with light illuminating the tense room. Stacks of books appeared surrounding the person and body of a young boy. He looked up at the tall, bright bookshelf in front of him. The light filtering through each book made him stand in surprise. Glenn said that this was one of the family's bookshelves. If you put your hand in the center, the book you want will appear. Rayon hesitantly looked at his grandfather, then raised his hand high, hoping something useful would appear. He touched the air with his hand. In that quiet bookcase, a black book flew out, automatically turned the pages and illuminated. Rayon raised her hand high with a disappointed look at the book's worn appearance. Glenn was startled, and the butler was also surprised by the book. Glenn shouted loudly, "What's going on? Why did you get that book?" Rayon stood in front of the book that belonged to her and was stunned. Even though she had never touched it, it had turned automatically. The 10,000 fire cultivation technique appeared on the book's ceiling, causing Rayon to curiously touch it. As soon as he touched the book, he reacted strongly. It frantically turned the pages of bright light, the whole book, page by page, flying around Rayon, scaring him. The book fell to the ground. He looked at the book in fear and surprise. Glenn stood on the podium observing everything. The fire ring surrounding the room reminded the Lord of the past. In the past, when he was informed about his daughter's affairs, he bluntly dismissed them and only cared about Zygarde's prosperity. Even when Sylvia left, he just considered it a trivial matter. After days of thinking about his family and putting his feelings aside, he built an army that could overcome the evil wall. As the family grew stronger and stronger, his loss also became greater and greater. At that time, he looked at the letter in his hand and heard that his son-in-law and niece had been killed by lightning, and Sylvia had escaped the sudden attack. Faced with that collapse, he could do nothing but watch. Even the Lord himself was pitiful. He finally regained his emotions, but things could never go back to the way they used to be. Glenn vowed that this time, even if he was hated, he would still be able to protect Sylvia and her daughter. The book floated in the air. Rayon was surprised because he was being pushed along with them, suddenly startled by his grandfather's call. Glenn stood still and asked his nephew what he had just done. He bewilderedly raised his innocent hand, only remembering the trick of disappearing in his son's hand. The Lord continued to ask what the name of the book was. Rayon slowly stopped, looking at his hand surrounded by light, the coil of 10,000 fires of cultivation. The Demon Venerable system shows 10,000 fires of cultivation. You have to face the eternal fire, having remembered all 10,000 fires of cultivation. Glenn stood high above and looked, asking if Rayon could remember all the contents inside. Then sit down on your throne. I understand you have received your reward for the bronze tablet. Now you can go home. Rayon obeyed, then left. The butler and the Lord sat down and looked at their nephew. The butler was scared and asked about the cultivation skill that the master had received. Glenn nodded and said that it was the cultivation technique of the first clan. In history, no one was able to take it out and read it. He didn't expect Rayon to have it. The butler is worried about the safety of Sylvia and her mother, Lord Channon. You don't have to worry. No one knows about the 10,000 fire technique. Rayon happily left with Demon Venerable. The butler was still worried about the book's disappearance. The Lord looked up at the skyscraper bookshelf. Anyway, no one had it. If he didn't pass it on, he would be lost. 1. Glenn had a cold face and had a premonition that there would be a new breeze in the future. Rayon sat in the room in a daze. He looked at his hand and wondered why he was given this thing, because even the gold cards weren't enough to do it. Exchange for such skillful practice. Rayon placed his hand in front of his stomach, telling himself that he would have to learn properly because it was no less powerful than fire. Subconsciously he stepped in front of a fire ring, slowly raised his fingers to touch and then grabbed it. Returning to reality, his eyes frowned in annoyance as he lifted his hand. Even though he had tried to defend himself many times, it was difficult to accumulate aura, so he didn't expect much. Rayon was bothered by the Ma-Tun flying next to him. It seems like you're having a hard time. Go with all your strength. If someone else touches you, you'll be in big trouble. Although Rayon was skeptical, she still found it reasonable. The 10,000 fire cultivating technique absorbed nature's energy and accumulated aura in the energy center. If interrupted at a critical time, the mainer circuit or the energy field can be broken and the person will become disabled. For Rayon, it is even more dangerous because his mainer veins contain ice energy. Being teased by the flying essence, Rayon put her hand on her chest and looked at him and suddenly realized something was wrong. Ma-Tun bared his fangs and smiled sinisterly, intending to interrupt during practice. Rayon gradually worried and advised him not to do that because his body would become disabled. Ma-Tun laughed because he would not be affected. Even if his limbs were severed, he could reattach them. As soon as the disabled Rayon gave up everything, that was the most suitable time. Rayon provoked and expected Ma-Tun's tricks. He proudly flew around Rayon and said that he would attack suddenly. Rayon looked at Ma-Tun with an unknown shape in front of him and thought to himself. Is he an enemy? He is a ghost who always wants to possess the body when there is an opening and is the embodiment of rage. Must be more careful now. Rayon breathed a sigh of relief and put aside the old matter, saying he had other things to deal with. He walked towards the window in the night. A woman came every night, looked out, and Rayon decided to deal with it. That woman reminded him of what he did in his previous life. Under the sky garden, in front is a lake reflecting the moonlight. There was a woman in a maid outfit with brown hair named Judine sitting in front of the water. She is a spy installed in the Annex mansion. She worked hard to write a secret notice because before, she didn't see anything in the newspaper, but now there is. Judine was surprised that the master could receive high-level cultivation skills with only the bronze card command. When she peeked at him practicing and saw the extremely intense flow while cultivating spiritual energy, each line of words began to be written. This was important information for the Central Martial Arts Palace. She nervously looked at the letter in her hand. Even though this was a mission, she didn't know how long it would last past their eyes. Judine folded the letter and gently dropped it into the lake, then watched the letter drift away. She sighed after completing her task. Just as she was about to return, she was stabbed in the neck. She glared up and saw a figure in a black coat holding a knife and threatening her. He leaned closer and threatened that if she moved, she would be killed. He forced her to lower her eyes to look at the lake, scaring her. Seeing the knife getting closer and closer to her neck, Judine was scared and curious about the identity of the person in front of her with murderous intent. Looking down at the reflecting pool, it turned out to be Rayon Ziegert. Looking at her boss's face, she was scared and didn't know why she was being followed by him like that. Rayon leaned close to Judine's ear. He had known for a long time that he was being followed. She was afraid to remember the times when she had followed him, whether outdoors or in the room, without leaving any traces, but still. Discovered. Rayon gently advanced the knife to force the other person to open her mouth. He pulled out a black pill, put it in her mouth, and shoved it straight into her throat, causing her eyes to show fear. Judine collapsed miserably. Rayon stepped forward and reached into the lake to pick up the soaked paper. He turned to the girl because he couldn't read the contents, so he knew for sure that there was another way to read it. Rayon read the contents of the letter: water, earth, fire, wind, moonlight. Each line of text that was read made Judine clutch her stomach in fear. He discovered that the key word was moonlight, making her feel numb. She asked why Rayon knew those things. He mentioned the names of the Zeegard family and concluded that Carol did it. Judine despaired when she saw that the secret was out. She stared at the master because her skills had been practiced very carefully but were still discovered. She was stunned to realize the cramping pain in her body. Looking at his trembling hand, he surmised that it was a parasite. Recalling memories, Judine was assigned by Carol to be a spy. He promised that if he did well, he would give her what she needed. The maid knelt down and asked if Rayon had fed her worms. The owner widened his eyes with a surprised expression and looked at the pathetic face opposite because Judine knew about the insects. She began to have symptoms of vomiting, quickly covering herself with her hands and collapsing. By injecting it into the target's body, the poisoner can perceive the opponent's location and thoughts. This is one of the scariest excuses. The victim could be killed at any time with agonizing pain. Rayon told her secret. He knew she was a martial arts spy sent 7 months ago. Judine fearfully put her hands on the cold ground. Rayon triumphantly held the letter in her hand, knowing that everyone was being investigated by her. Judine herself thought this was a simple mission that only needed to collect evidence. She looked up at the person in front of her, a demon living in this mansion. The maid quickly shouted loudly and begged, saying she would change the content of the letter, but her request was rejected. Judine glared at the other person. Rayon slowly lowered himself to look at her sinisterly. From now on he would be a double agent, informing Carol on what he could know himself and hiding what he knew. Important matter. At the same time, he brought Rayon valuable information. Judine had no other choice but nodded in agreement. The master rolled his eyes and smiled at her, then walked away, leaving the maid kneeling down with hopeless eyes. Ma Tun appeared, wondering why Rayon could summon the insects. He denied, saying he just gave her poison, and that he had read her mind and used another method. Ma Tun is afraid of his master. This is the real demon. After training, the day of returning to the training school came, and I had to go through a rough breakup. During that time, despite constant efforts, on the day of departure, he was still unable to create an aura. Rayon returned to school and stood among the other students to cover the situation. Only 42 people passed the exam. Rimmer was indeed strict about the results. There was a voice calling him from behind. Silver-haired Renan approached. Rayon also turned around and stood facing the girl in front of him. Renan looked at him and remembered when he was at the mansion. She was eating cookies and talking to her mother. Her mother asked her if she had thanked her when Rayon trained her. She bluntly said that she had not made her question. It turned out that the main reason was that her father told her not to talk to boys, so her mother could only laugh. Mom looked at Dad's hot cup on the table, saying that receiving help and saying thank you was common courtesy, making Renan look surprised, at which she just blushed silently. Right when she was standing in front of Rayon, she suddenly said thank you, surprising him, not understanding the floating demon and not being able to understand this confusing problem. Renan turned away. Rayon heard the call from afar. Darien ran out of breath to ask and complain about the school's training. Darien's unrepentant words made his opponent feel discouraged. He continued to praise Rayon and said luckily Burden was not the winner. While speaking, he felt a slight chill down his spine. He stuck out his tongue in panic and saw Burden standing behind him. Darien fell back and looked up in fear. Burden stepped forward and looked straight into Rayon's eyes. He was cold and silent. Burden didn't say anything. Burden suddenly lowered his head, admitting his own incompetence and also saying that he would not give up. He raised his head firmly, vowing to try his best, and stood proudly in front of Rayon, turned around and left, to everyone's surprise. Love Flower flew up to look at Burden's shadow. Rayon was surprised that a 13-year-old aggressive boy knew how to admit his own mistakes. Ma Tun frantically blamed him for not punishing that guy more appropriately, and the whole training ground was attracted by a voice echoing from afar. Mr. Rimmer awkwardly went over to apologize for being late, not forgetting to ask if the students had rested properly. The teacher stood in front of 42 students and congratulated them all on becoming official students. Today will be the first training session, some additional training will be given, and the first session will be about spiritual energy cultivation methods. While speaking, both teachers and students were interrupted by a noise in the distance. A woman in a white outfit with black hair opened the training door. She stood in front of the door angrily cursing. Damn, the door refused to open and she almost got into trouble. Darian exuded fear and disbelief. Rimmer smiled slightly and introduced that he was not the one in charge of instructing her, but she was the failed student of the previous batch and from now on everyone will practice together. The black-haired girl stepped forward and introduced herself as Martha Zeegard, a direct descendant. She stood majestically, leaning on her hands and sighing. The teacher in charge was trying to defend her as a good person when he was interrupted. Martha waved her hand and looked around and asked, "Who's the top student? We can't let low-class people stand above us like that." Rayon stood below, observing with a serious face, while Martha showed a crazy face demanding to fight. She aggressively stepped forward to provoke. Rayon lamented the feng shui gods. Why'd I keep meeting this type of person? He stepped forward and boldly announced that he was Rayon Zeegard, a first-class student at the academy, causing those behind him to step back in fear. Martha smiled scornfully, showing interest in provoking Rayon, who did not have the temperament of a leader. She turned her hand to start a decisive battle. Burden walked out, crossed his arms over his chest, and criticized Martha for being rude, making her startle, and criticized the other person for being disrespectful to his seniors. She glared at Burden, but he did not give up. She frantically reminded the other person to be careful with her mouth. Burden questioned whether she doubted the results of being the head of the academy. Martha reminded him of an old story about when Burden also made a fuss about it and looked straight at him. He loosened his grip and spoke just because he didn't want to look back at his old embarrassed appearance. Rayon stood behind Martha, surprised at the change in the life of the man who was once his rival. Rhinon suddenly stepped forward to block his friend, extending his arms to warn Martha. She looked at the scene and said sarcastically, "What a beautiful friendship." Stepp turned around and said he would be the bad guy, then smiled evilly and suddenly jumped into the air to attack Rayon, making everyone look on in fear. The monstrous Martha gathered her strength into her fist and rushed towards the leader. Rayon easily dodged without wasting any effort, causing the aggressive person to lose momentum with a surprised look on his face. She continued to frantically attack forward. Rayon punched her again, making her eyes widen. She attacked with such force that he was thrown far away, contrary to Burden's worries. Rimmer very leisurely enjoyed this competition. Martha stood there in a daze, the surrounding dust flying up and covering her feet. She clenched her fists and smiled scornfully at the other person. Looking straight at it, Rayon angrily kicked down and shattered the arena. Now he raised his fist and said, "Don't think that just going like that will end the matter." Rimmer suddenly went up and held her hand. Martha glanced over and didn't know when he had been here. Rimmer criticizes Martha for not taking herself seriously and says Rayon hasn't learned her spiritual energy yet. Martha pushed the teacher's hand away from her and angrily left in front of Rayon. Demon Venerable was frustrated and did not understand why his master was humble and did not take action. The owner said he had fought back, but what the demon master needed was to make her head separate from her body. Rayon smiled slightly and thought it would be better if there was a bet. He walked towards the classroom following the students, and Rayon did not forget to remind the demon that he would show him a good show. In the afternoon, sunlight shone down on the training house. After a practice session, there was a 10-minute break. Burden sweating and grabbed his water bottle. He looked at his hand and felt the difficulty of training when reaching 2 stars. 3 stars also had to combine other skills. Looking back at Rayon, who has only been training for 1 month. It took Burden a month to learn the 7-shape punch. He turned his eyes to the other side, not only pressured by Rayon's progress. Martha was frantically swinging her practice sword into the air. He glanced over to see the crazy look on her face. Martha stopped her sword and took a deep breath, wondering why Rayon had only learned boxing for a month but was making such progress. It doesn't look like it was learned before like Burden and Rhinon. Their bodies still have cursed ice inside but they can still practice all day. She bitterly bowed her head and told herself that she could not let herself be inferior. People say that Martha's talent is formidable. Since being adopted by the Zirgot family, he has always become a hunter, surpassing all braggarts. Then ironically when they were desperate, she used to be a genius and the best. But now she was worried that she wouldn't be able to control herself. At night she returned to the mansion to be welcomed by the butler. She walked past expressionless in front of his surprise. Looking at her back she was just silent. He suddenly spoke, "No need to worry, lady." The voice startled her and she turned around. "What are you saying?" "Like I said, he showed off his good side, so people forgot that he would never defeat you." Martha asked suspiciously. The housekeeper smiled because Rayon had a fatal weakness that could not be overcome. In the training house, Rayon was practicing with a wooden sword and breathing heavily. 2 students approached him and wanted to ask about swordsmanship, but they didn't have the courage. Martha suddenly came up and applauded. She flattered the leader's swordsmanship and then the next moment criticized his sensing ability. The surrounding scene was silent. Rimmer sat in a chair observing nothing. Martha turned around and laughed happily because no one said anything like she thought. No one thought that Rayon still hadn't mastered aura after 4 months of practice. Last night when talking to the butler outside in the garden, he revealed that during the induction ceremony for Mono, the young master's induction level was the lowest. He was the only one who had not learned aura in the 5th training ground. The bronze medal only helped Rayon have a slightly better training method. "But I haven't mastered any method yet, so I'm sure the results of the evaluation ceremony are correct. He may be good at swordsmanship and fighting, but if he cannot use aura, he cannot become a true martial artist." Hearing that story from the butler made her laugh out loud with satisfaction. She gently stroked her hair smugly, criticizing Rayon for not even being worthy of bothering her, when suddenly she encountered Rhinon's eyes. Martha took the initiative to ask, but Rhinon still kept a cold face and chased her away, making her confused again. Renan had to chase her away a second time, then she turned and left for the mainstream classroom. Renan just watched without saying another word. In the training room at night, the lights were still on. Rayon sat down on the chair on the ground and the 2 water bottles had dried up. He tiredly put the sword on his shoulder and picked up the towel, looking at his hand with a satisfied smile. Recall that on the battlefield he did not learn martial arts but only how to survive and kill people. Only his assassination skills were enhanced and he could not learn anything else. He laughed because he didn't expect that learning martial arts to develop himself would be this fun. But Tun blamed Rayon for not protesting when she was humiliated. He was angry because Martha kept criticizing him but Rayon did not respond. Rayon refused to attack her because he knew he wouldn't gain anything from it. He opened the door. Suddenly in front of him was Renan. She looked at him and held a wooden box in her hand. Rayon was stunned. She opened the box and took a piece of ice cream from it and held it out in front of him to offer. Feeling the cold air when he took it, Renan urged him to eat it so he obeyed and put it in his mouth. While eating, I thought, I'm an assassin and I'm not supposed to eat what others give me, but he probably won't poison me. Rayon's eyes suddenly lit up. Ma Tun next to him was clearly surprised by the taste of the cake, flying around asking for more. Rayon also couldn't help but praise the taste. Renan closed the box saying it was ice cream and turned to leave. Rayon and Ma Tun were surprised because it happened so suddenly and partly because they still wanted to eat more of it. Ma Tun asked for more ice cream. Rayon's heart skipped a beat, wondering if she was worried about him or not. Remember, there were 4 in the box but there was only 1 left. Renan loves sweets but it seems like she left 1 for Rayon. Maybe she was going through a psychological struggle. He breathed softly and laughed about the warmth and ice cream he had just received. Rayon changed clothes and headed towards the annex. As soon as she announced her return, the mansion was all bustling. He sat in his room holding the report that Judine had sent to the Intermediate Martial Arts Hall. When asked by Rayon, she stammered and replied, "Nothing happened. They ordered me to check a bit about swordsmanship and skills but it seems that they are no longer interested in aura." Rayon did not forget to glance over and ask about her mother's situation and fortunately was less concerned. Otherwise, they will soon withdraw Judine, which makes him worried because he still has room to use. She hesitantly asked if the master intentionally did not learn aura. He happily asked her back, making her bow her head and tremble in fear. Rayon chased the maid out. Ma Venerable wondered uncomfortably. He only replied that taking advantage of situations and environments for personal benefit is a very smart thing. The Essence Emperor was curious about Rayon's hard training with aura, so he leaned back and decided to go practice, making the demon Venerable startled. As soon as I opened the door, I saw a familiar figure. Rimmer was sitting on a tree stump that had been cut, playing with the sparrows. Rayon called out, causing the teacher to look over in surprise. He stood in front of the student and said he was here to teach him. Putting his hand on the student's shoulder, he laughed loudly and said he would tell him his attributes. In the rustling green forest, Rimmer tiptoed ahead followed by Rayon who was curious about the lesson. The teacher shook his head and told him to stop complaining and focus on moving forward. Seeing that the young student was still endlessly curious about learning manners in the forest, he just laughed it off. Remembering the first time he saw Rayon's ultimate technique, he saw a flame as hot as lava, completely different from normal techniques. Try to adapt your body's coldness to the fire instead of removing it from your manner. He hopes Rayon can master this skill. Rimmer looked at the student who was trying to follow behind him and said to stop, making Rayon confused. Turn your head and look at all the green trees. He was suspicious and asked the teacher if he was sure. The teacher did not answer but just held out his hand to control his manner towards Rayon. Rayon stood dumbfounded at his teacher's words. He wanted to create a wind blade to protect his master. What you're seeing now is the wind I chose, the blue wind of power that surrounded Rimmer's entire body and soared strongly into the air. Rayon raised his left hand to look at the 100 uncles. The teacher admitted that he made the wind weaker so that Rayon could get used to it, but it seemed like he wasn't afraid at all. Since he was born, he has been able to feel the wind because he is L. Rayon's demeanor is filled with cold air so it will be more difficult for him. There are many types of wind such as warm, cold or sharp. Rimmer raised his hand high. He wanted a wind blade that could pierce everything and finally got it. The teacher said that Rayon must find her own flame. Looking at his hands, Rayon said that if you want to find a fire, you should not burn the forest. Rimmer waved his hand teasingly then smirked and said, there is a place that suits you very well. In front of the blazing fire forge, there were the legs of a man sitting on a chair. Rimmer opened the wooden door and loudly greeted the man sitting in front of the forge. Rayon was curious and wondered where this was. Standing under the wooden roof, a chandelier hangs above and in the center is a red smithy. This is the place with the hottest and brightest fire in the north, a coal forge. The white-haired old blacksmith took off his thick gloves and asked Rimmer what he had brought, causing Rayon's face to darken. The trainer grimaced and said this was the homeowner's grandson. In front of Rayon was a horrifying scene that made his eyes widen. Looking at the sea of fire in front of him, he wondered if this was fire. In his previous life, he had seen countless flames, such as the fires created by his magic. Looking at the majestic fire in front of him, he was stunned at the temperature and image. Hold out your hand, this is the fire you want. As soon as he grabbed it, the fire shrank and retreated back to the smithy. Looking back, I saw that the fire had subsided. The blacksmith introduced himself as Vankin, startling Rayon. The old man sat back and said that if you want to be polite, go somewhere else. Rayon looked at the huge back and thought about the name he had just heard. Vankin is an artist famous around the world for his craftsmanship. He was the one who created Lord Glenn's true heavenly sword, but disappeared 30 years ago. He bowed respectfully and introduced his name as Rayon Zeegard. Vankin asked suspiciously if his friend had told that kid about him. Rimmer shook his head. The teacher told Rayon that he was a retired artisan. He has been watching the fire at this smithy for 10 years. He tilted his head and explained that he watched the fire all year so the children wouldn't see the 9-sign fire anywhere else. Rimmer asked for help but was refused. The teacher still refused to give up and used the excuse of too many eyes and ears to make Vankin curious. He was surprised to learn that the boy standing in front of him was Sylvia's son and immediately turned around. Rayon placed his hand on his left chest with a promise not to bother the smith. The old man's eyes looked over with sadness and said, "I'm making charcoal," making Rayon bewildered. "Yellow charcoal will create a stronger fire than white and black charcoal. Vankin has been doing this for 10 years. Rayon can be everything. If you don't bother him." He beamed happily and thanked the old smith profusely. Rimmer and Vankin stood in front of the blacksmith's house. He laughed at his friend's ease and promised to bring him wine. Vankin denied that the main reason was because the furnace fire burned so brightly when the child entered that it exposed the coals underneath. It has the power to control fire. He lowered his eyes and said that if he were Rayon, he could make his dream come true. He sat quietly next to the hot coal furnace, sweating but still trying to direct his attention to the fire to gradually understand it. People say that fire is the scariest and strongest element, but if you can control it, things are completely different. A tamed fire will be stronger than any element in this world, and the 10,000 fire cultivation skills have also been awakened. Rayon needs to control fire because the 10,000 fire cultivation technique is the eternal fire that cultivation technique brought to him. Remember what Rimmer once said, remember the image of the fire you want to have. Rayon unconsciously stared at the fire that was no different from a sphere in front of him, envisioning its image as well as the image of the fire he needed. For some reason, at this moment, Darius's smug smile appeared in his mind. He wanted to slit his throat and mix it with blood to make the fire flare up fiercely. Or was it the intensity of the urge to help Sylvia? Get the title of the mainstream for example. The path leading to my goal is all darkness. I can't see anything, but the torch that lights this path and the fire that defeats the monsters Rayon needs is a durable fire with enough heat to light his path. It's the kind of fire that's warm and passionate, making every dark place on his path bright. That's all Rayon felt in her mind. Now he sat next to the burning fire, continuing to think about a stream of fire energy stronger than usual flowing through his body. The temperature of this furnace space seemed to penetrate into my skin. Even though it was very hot, Rayon told herself that she must concentrate to catch this thing. Feel a little more until the scattered flames form a fixed block. His will is swimming in a sea of hot fire, but the image is unclear. Is this a state of indeterminacy? Rayon could see his own subconscious right before his eyes, but for it to gather into a mass like he wanted, it took a little more concentration. Suddenly, while trying to control the fire, he suddenly felt his left hand make a crackling sound like ice was gradually covering it. Being the quintessential, grinning and saying, "It's my turn," and I jumped out on that day with extreme excitement. Haven't we already told each other that we will wait until the weakest person to freeze everything? The old man is playing tricks again. Right on the day when he needed to concentrate the most, the demon essence threw a huge block of ice into the cool fire that Rayon was trying to catch with his consciousness. The cold air hit his face, causing Rayon to quickly dodge back to avoid the ice flakes hitting his face. He felt anger welling up in his body, blaming himself for being too subjective. Why did it have to be at this exact moment? Because lately the quintessence is no different than a quiet cat that only curiously looks back and forth very quietly. So many times he has forgotten that this demon king is not his ally. No matter how much the interface resembles a cat, the essence is still a devil who wants to take his life. After all, he was still a genuine demon king who had lived for thousands of years, and was now looking straight at Rayon with his eyes full of pleasure, as if he had controlled the fire inside his heart. When the burning fire was frozen, Rayon felt like his body was breaking into pieces, slowly taking over his mind. If I move now, I will die, but if I stop cultivating 10,000 fires, I will also die. There was no other way. He had to concentrate his aura, grit his teeth to resist the cold air of this elite emperor. He opened his mouth to try to adjust his breathing, thinking that if he wanted to live, he had to think of a way to fight this cold, but his mind was so foggy. Right when you felt everything was falling apart, that elite's face turned upside down to look at you, looking at him struggling and smiling happily. Do you think you can endure my strength like before? No? He liked it very much. He liked to see Rayon struggling like that to fight against his will, and then he would feel more like it when he was gradually losing control of his body, making everything gradually become useless. As Rayon's gaze gradually closed, the quintessence chuckled and declared, "Your body and soul are now mine." He was gradually losing consciousness. The mocking voice of the elite emperor rang in his ears. "Your life's efforts were all in vain. You were no different from that guy working in the furnace just now, but don't worry. I will definitely avenge you." Revenge with his cruel heart. Suddenly the two words, furnace, that were quintessentially spoken echoed in Rayon's gradually drowsy mind. He listened to his mind and thanked the Demon King for suggesting a way out of his current, all-or-nothing situation. He turned around and used another method because if he did nothing, I will definitely die myself. Currently, Rayon used a completely different method from what he tried before. Instead of absorbing the natural mana heated by the furnace, Rayon would directly absorb mana from the furnace right away. At first he didn't do so because the fire in this furnace was much stronger and hotter and could swallow everything. So at first he didn't want to try, but now he had no other way. He had to absorb it. That's it. He stood up and spread his arms out, trying to control the fire that was raging like a terrible fire in front of him. Rayon's hair flew back, his shirt fluttered, he caused the mana in the fire to rush out. And my body and made the Demon King scream in terror. "Hey, what are you doing? You have to try, nothing else," he gritted, not wanting to curse the elite but instead focusing on the giant fire he was trying to control. The fire in the furnace at the other end connected with the fire burning on the blacksmith Vankin's slot. He sat next to the warm fire, making small crackling sounds and nodding off. Suddenly, something urged Vankin to open his eyes immediately, just in time for the fire from the furnace to rush across his huge body, wanting to lick every piece of clothing. Vankin was startled and fell out of his chair, looking at the fire rising so high without him adding any wood, wondering why it rose so high. I have never seen a fire so strong, and the furnace must have had a reason for it to burn so fiercely. Playing back and looking at the only factor that could have an influence, Rayon Zygarde, he thought to himself, could it be that kid who is doing this? But why did he look so strange? He was breathing heavily, his mouth exhaling like he was in a cold area. How could his body be cold like that in a furnace? Feeling unusual, Vankin stood up and approached the boy, intending to ask if he was okay. "Why are you shaking like a leaf? Say something?" Of course he did not know that Rayon was trying to resist the ice of the essence inside his body. He only found this boy strange, so he did not dare to come close, but suddenly Rimmer appeared at the right moment. This was not between Vankin and Rayon, blocking his view without the slightest loss of composure or disturbance due to the condition of the boy before him. Looking straight at the blacksmith, he calmly told him to leave her alone and not to touch her. But how could that be? Even Vankin knew that Rayon was suffering from something that could cause his body to die on the spot. Rimmer explained briefly that she was currently in a completely uncertain state, so we couldn't do anything. It was a form of mental combat. Even though we know that he is struggling to resist the energy flows inside, if we touch her, Rayon will vomit blood and die. According to the direction the old blacksmith pointed, is that cold air you speak of? Is there nothing we can do? Reimer turned around and looked at Rayon one more time, then replied, "There's nothing we can do, it's too dangerous." Although he was also worried, he knew he really couldn't do anything. He could only pray to heaven and beg Rayon, "Please try not to die." There was no way he could die. His anger rolled with the burning fire, crushing the damn things that the old demon had just created. Currently, Rayon was kneeling on the floor, both resisting the ferocity of the fire and enduring the incessant screams of the elite. "Hey you, stop now, you can't do anything anymore. That's nonsense, this damn devil dares to say he can't do anything? Tell him that Rayon himself has died suddenly once before, this time nothing can stop him. Thinking back, my previous life was very meaningless and in the end I still died without closing my eyes. Surely in this life, when given the opportunity to do it again, Rayon will not repeat that mistake. He will overcome giant icebergs." The demon's giant reaches out to shape the fire he desires. Outside, Vankin's voice was ringing in panic. The temperature was too high. The furnace would burst at this rate. The thermometer had jumped to the red part. The blacksmith guessed that this furnace could not withstand such a temperature jump. Rimmer also knew that, but before his eyes, the mana in the furnace was gradually gathering in one place, meaning that Rayon's efforts were really working. I just couldn't believe it. The boy in front of me was actually absorbing mana from that burning fire. By the time she realized it was too late, Rayon was risking her life to fight the giant fire in the furnace. He opened his mouth and shouted loudly to push all of the Demon King's ice out of his body. He also roared to fight back, not wanting him to really control the fire in front of him. Yet in the end Rayon did it. His hand grasped the burning fire, turning it into a ball that he could grasp. Suddenly, the furnace exploded with a fierce sound as if a bomb had hit it. Nothing could be seen around but fire. Even the blacksmith's house had a huge hole due to the terrible pressure. The fire on the roof turned into a dense column of smoke. But at this moment, all of Rimmer's attention was on Rayon. He raised his hand through the smoke and shouted, "Are you okay? Answer me." Just as he was about to rush to find the student, Rimmer suddenly opened his eyes in horror, seeing the blonde-haired child leisurely standing up in the dust and smoke with yellow flames flickering in the air. He doesn't look like anything is wrong, and isn't that thing called scattered flames a golden fire? The boy has succeeded. As soon as all the tiredness passed, Rayon looked down at his hand and discovered that the system had just learned that he had learned the 10,000 fire cultivation technique. Next, there was a series of notifications from the system that the 10,000 fire cultivation technique had reached 2 stars thanks to the high temperature, thus fire resistance was created after leveling up. The icy essence has melted, and the low endurance attribute has disappeared. A series of effects such as cold air condensing into ice create an icy aura that condenses into a crystal-like flower on Rayon's hand, truly beautiful. On top of that, his icy aura has increased to 2 stars thanks to the rage from the cold. Putting her hand on her chest, Rayon felt that things were going much better than she thought. She didn't expect to be able to eat it right away. Even though I was struggling just now, I didn't expect to be able to achieve so much, and above all, what is the system saying? It says that you have endured the wrath of the elite, so all your points and stats will increase. Is this a dream or something? Why does he give everything to me? In just one moment, I had everything that took me years to achieve. While Rayon was extremely surprised, the elite seemed to go crazy when he read the words on the notice board. On the cat-like face was anger mixed with surprise and frustration. Then the essence turned upside down and cursed Rayon. What kind of person is that? Your spirit is always weak. How can you withstand my attack? I've said it all along but still don't believe it. Rayon looked at the Ma-Tun above with pride. I didn't say I can't fight you. Don't be there and misunderstand. Looking at Ma-Tun district in a pile looking frustrated, Rayon realized that he had just spoken harshly just now, but it was true that he almost died, so he had to be more careful. After this for sure, even though he is a little closer to the Essence Emperor, he is still an enemy who wants to take over his body. The important thing has to be reminded 3 times. I can't let him see my weaknesses or secrets. Suddenly, Rayon heard a passionate voice behind her asking, "Hey, are you okay?" Vankin was looking very worriedly at the boy in front of him, but he simply looked at his uncle, told me it was okay and that this confident appearance must have gotten Oro. Thanks to you, Mr. Blacksmith. Rayon sincerely thanked him, then turned to look at the pile of broken things he made in your blacksmith workshop and apologized. This furnace broke because of me. That's okay. Vankin has been a blacksmith in this workshop for more than 10 years. Repairing every wall or roof is no big deal for him, as long as this kid is okay. Just as he was about to say, I'll build another kiln, that's it. Suddenly there was a popping sound in the kiln that caught Vankin's attention. Looking at his timid steps towards the familiar smithy, Rayon saw something very strange that he could hardly believe with the thoughts that crossed his mind. He quietly approached, picked up the shovel, and shoveled the pile of coal inside out to see that it was no longer the golden coal like before, but it was completely different from the blazing fire inside. What Vankin called golden coal in surprise, Rayon suddenly remembered. Didn't the old blacksmith say that he had been sitting in this furnace for 10 years just to create golden coal? Indeed. Over the years, many people have told Vankin that golden coal only exists in legends, and many people have whispered behind the seasoned blacksmith's back that he should go away. Never get that. Yet, the legendary golden coal now appeared before Vankin, not 1 but 3 lumps. It seems that today not only the young man behind Vankin is lucky, he is also as lucky as him. Holding it out for Rayon to see, Vankin introduced this as golden coal, which burns stronger than white coal and burns longer than lamp coal. Thanks to you, I was able to create what I've been trying to create for decades. So, he sincerely thanked this boy. He didn't know why golden coal was so precious, but Vankin's gesture showed that what he was saying was true, making the young man even more confused. What did I do? Vankin's austere face suddenly turned extremely affectionate as he explained. Every time you practice here, the fire will burn stronger than before. Even your breathing will make the fire burn fiercely. The temperature will spread throughout this place. Putting the golden coal into the furnace again, he looked at the young man and continued to explain. I'm just a rough guy who works all day with dikes and hammers, but I know what you did. So all this golden coal is thanks to you. And I want to ask you a question, Rayon. What is your goal? Suddenly asked by a blacksmith what his goal was, Rayon was a bit stunned. He continued, yes, I wanted to ask what kind of swordsman do you want to become? That was a question that Rayon had never asked himself because he was an assassin in his previous life and in this life he was reincarnated into a family of swordsmen. There is definitely a huge contradiction within myself. Thinking for a moment, Rayon placed his hand on his heart extremely seriously and replied, I want to become a swordsman, never giving up no matter what opponent I face. Although it sounded general, Vankin felt very admired because he could not expect a child to say such a certain sentence. A swordsman never gives up. In 3 to 5 years, you will be able to have a sword of your own, and when you think you have enough mind to use it, come here. Find me, I will save them for that day. They, in Vankin's words, are the golden coal that he will set aside to cast Rayon a sword worthy of him. Hearing that, Rayon suddenly became unusually shy. Are you saying you will practice swords for me? But I heard that you've already retired, so you don't have to wash your hands of your career. It's not difficult to think about retiring and then going back to work, so just try to live until then, Rayon. Vankin raised his hand and waved goodbye to the young man who now walked alone through the forest to return to his home. Whoever goes that way has only one person above watching from beginning to end, which is Rimmer. After the fire and explosion, the blacksmith workshop was destroyed. He escaped here to breathe fresh air. There's no need to wonder anymore, because he finally has his own aura. Standing alone in the cool afternoon breeze, Rimmer still remembered the feeling he had just now when he saw Rayon alone resisting the burning fire of the smithy. It's true that this kid really makes people worry, doesn't he? Then, pretending like he didn't know someone was coming from behind, Rimmer mumbled and asked if I said it right, homeowner? Glent Zygert had come to stand right behind him at some point with an extremely serious expression, no different from any other day, in complete contrast to Rimmer's cheerful expression right now. You come here every day because you're worried about the kid, so you're probably relieved now, right? Glent immediately refused. I didn't come here because I was worried, so Rimmer didn't press the Lord anymore and explained to him. It was probably because of the heat from the furnace that the amount and purity of the boy's aura was extremely high, not to mention that he has now stabilized his aura flow, truly a rare talent. Looking down at the little boy who was running back home, Glent was silent for a long time and then suddenly spoke up, no way, making Rimmer not understand anything. He turned his weakness into an advantage, looking at his nephew who was still immersed in the feeling of reminiscing when he held the fire in his hand. The Lord commented. The next day, in the 5th training hall, Rihanna walked back and forth looking at the door for a long time but still did not see her figure waiting to return. Rayon, when will you come back? The sweets in her hand had been waiting with her for a long time. Rayon had never shared the sweets with anyone and was still waiting for him to enjoy. She had heard people say that Rayon had not yet created aura even though she had been in this place for 7 months. Maybe he's not as good as rumored. Young Master Burden or Lady Marthan should take his position. He doesn't have any talent yet. Rhinan listened to everyone's comments and felt sad for Rayon. Looking down at her cake box, she wanted to help him because Mom said she had to repay the people who helped her. While feeling sad because she didn't know when Rayon would return, suddenly the sound from the front door attracted Rayon's eyes. Raising his head, he unexpectedly saw familiar blonde hair in a training outfit gradually moving towards him. Still Rayon's steady footsteps crossing the large training hall. As he walked, he mumbled to the elite emperor next to him. I told you to stop trying to do useless things. He is very bitter since the day he caught the fire with his hands. Always nagging him not to be arrogant, and one day we will be able to do it. Ignoring the screaming elite behind him, he just cursed hard and then suddenly realized why Rayon was standing here. The girl kept staring at Rayon from the moment he stepped through the wooden door, so he had to stop to see if she had anything to say to him. Without saying a word, Rayon gently opened the box in his hand. Today there is no longer a black pill inside, but there are 2 more ice cream pills, one green, one pink, which have been very carefully preserved. This much is enough to understand Rainan's sincerity. She held out the ice cream box towards her friend's face, leaving only the words, trying, and it seemed like the young man in front of her was giving her a strange feeling. Very surprised, I looked up to see Rayon picking up an ice cream from the box. Thank you. His attitude is still very normal, but what surprised Rainan the most was that the cold air emanating from Rayon's body after today was much stronger and more comfortable. Maybe Rayon doesn't know this. Being so familiar with Rainan's stunned face in front of him, he just gently turned around, picked up the cool ice cream in his hand, put it in his mouth and chewed it. The flavor of the ice cream along with its coolness made the flower emperor next to him slowly jump up. It's so delicious. It's been a long time since I last ate it, but it's still delicious as ever. Eat it. Eat the remaining 2 for me too. He widened his eyes like a cat asking for more pate, causing Rayon to whisper angrily while glancing back at him. You probably know that this is his food. Don't be so greedy. Straighten yourself out. What's it like to be a demon king and all that but keep asking for people's ice cream? Saying that, Rayon closed the lid of Rainan's ice cream box. Even though she still gave him 3 pieces this time, he knew how much Rainan wanted to eat sweets, so he just thanked her. Eating just 1 was enough. So do you feel better? Rainan asked another question that had no beginning or end, making Rayon extremely surprised. I didn't understand what this girl was saying, but I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, I'm better. Rainan just wants to care for him. Just hearing that, the girl's cheeks turned red with a clear expression of happiness on her face, then happily brought the box back with her to the resting area. Just 1 sentence from Rayon like that was enough to make Rainan feel happy all day. But seeing the girl's attitude like that, he himself was very happy. What a strange girl. A moment later, Rimmer's familiar footsteps appeared before all the students here to give instructions. Just practicing like this all day is boring, so this month I've prepared something extra special. Because everyone has been practicing the foundation for these 7 months, it's time for you to warm up your energy. Why did Mr. Rimmer suddenly do that? They whispered below and asked each other, what exactly was this red-haired goblin teacher trying to do? And his intentions were definitely not simple. Rimmer, let the kids guess for a while and then finally decide. You guys will fight each other for a month. Just hearing that, Martha was the first to be happy. This girl loves to fight. Now the goblin teacher even gave me 1 month to fight. No wonder why he didn't like it. Furthermore, Rimmer wants to let all the children here know that the result of that match will affect your graduation ranking, so I advise you to prepare carefully for next month. While speaking, suddenly someone's hand raised up to interrupt. Unexpectedly Martha wanted to add more details. What about those who are lagging behind? Teacher, what about those who have not yet created aura? Everyone turned their eyes to Martha, or rather glanced at the person standing behind her. The person Martha was referring to here was none other than Rayon. Even Rimmer knew that she was intentionally attacking Rayon, so he smiled and said to help. Fortunately, I heard that those girls had already created an aura, causing the smile on Martha's lips to disappear immediately. Since when? How did that happen? That was the only thing that made Martha feel superior to Rayon, so when she heard Rimmer pretend she didn't understand, she muttered. Maybe it was today or yesterday, I'm not sure. Martha immediately turned around and looked at the blonde guy behind her. This time, instead of being upset that he had an aura, Martha was extremely confident and stated directly, finally, I have a chance to fight you, because I thought I would be bored to death. It's been so long. Rayon didn't say a word, just looked back as if the response was enough to make Martha itch and walked over to instruct him further. Do you remember what I said? I don't listen to orders from people weaker than me, but I've put up with you enough. It's been a long time, I'm sure you've had a hard time. The location is beyond my ability. Clearly in Martha's bright smile was bitterness over losing first place to Rayon. Today she declared, I will personally take this opportunity and deal with you once. Just as she was about to tease her some more, suddenly someone else's hand was placed between the two of them. Burden moved to separate her from Rayon and asked Martha to step back. He hasn't had Oro for a full day yet, do you have the honor of being a swordsman? It's okay for Martha to tease people, but when she's said to hurt her heart, the sting is unbearable. She bit her lower lip to try to contain her anger, then patted young Master Burden's shoulder as if she understood. You grew up with such honor, so honor must be very important. Honor is something reserved for those who deserve it. This way of exposing her made Burden feel uncomfortable, so he glanced over and told her to stop talking. But how can Martha's mouth stay still? She pointed jokingly at the mobsters behind her. Those idiots could only learn Auror in a month, but it took our top students 6 months straight. Even if they had advanced techniques, it would take an average of 7 months. Which means this guy is actually very stupid and very incompetent. Murmurs began to rise among the surrounding students when Martha concluded. The two of them attended the evaluation together, so they probably knew. Having said that, even Burden could not continue to speak for his friend, because it was Burden who was defeated by Rayon in that evaluation. And what she said was not wrong. A swordsman who has not learned Auror cannot become famous, no matter how good his swordsmanship talent is. Without Auror he is useless. No one objected. Martha turned her head towards the teacher behind her and joked. He thought this duel was also because he wanted to change the top student, right? Who knows, it won't be easy to get a hold of Rimmer. He pretended to have nothing to do with it. So Martha even pushed forward and called out, Hey Rayon Zegard, you've been the leader for too long. She made a clear mockery and warned, it's time for you to step back. Like I said, let's fight each other and choose the leader. Wanting to provoke a solo match on the spot, Rayon's answer was bluntly no. If you don't have money, how can you gamble? If you want to compete for my top position, you have to offer something. That's the same value. Yet Martha, shamelessly, continues to provoke you. You still don't understand your position, are you stupid? There's no one on your side here, so are you afraid or something? Before Martha's aggressive eyes was Rayon's extremely calm face as he said those 3 simple words, causing everyone to fall silent for a moment. Pointing at herself, Martha's smile stiffened on her lips as if she didn't understand what he was saying. Then without waiting for Rayon to answer, she held her stomach and burst out laughing like there was something very funny, laughing so hard. His body trembled as if someone had just tickled him. After laughing and criticizing Martha, she acted like it's okay. I'll forgive you. You want me to offer something, right? Going through her bag, she brought out a medicinal pill called Genius Pill. A magic medicine that my father gave me. It will help strengthen the body and aura. Putting the box in front of Rayon, Martha said I will use this to make a bet with you and if you win, you will receive it. What do you think? Is this bet interesting? Rayon smiled and whispered privately for only the elite to listen. Do you remember when I said I should wait until I tried Martha? Of course Ma Tun still remembered, but he was curious as to why Rayon brought it up at this time. But now he understood the reason. Because Rayon had something he wanted to get from Martha and this was God-given opportunity. Or rather, as a result of a series of deliberate provocations, Martha, a month later, in her expensive private room, where there were countless used and discarded swords lying on the floor, Martha I went to the calendar on the wall and thought about how a month had passed. Finally, the opportunity for revenge that she had been waiting for so long came. Martha twirled her wrists and practiced swordsmanship to regain her confidence. Before coming here, Martha had never been beaten by someone her age and that was the first time someone dared to touch her directly. This is an opportunity to take revenge for the humiliation he caused me 8 months ago. She frowned as she remembered and then began mumbling curses. That bastard Rayon had only learned Oro for a month. There was no way he could win against someone like me who had been practicing for 3 years. But waiting for such an incompetent person is just a waste of time. so Martha has always pushed herself to become stronger. Because she herself also needed to save someone, perhaps that person created the steadfastness in Martha's eyes. Today would be the end of Rayon Zegard that she had long been waiting for, and also the day he expected to be able to take the genius pill from the young girl. Before the matches began, students were gathered in front of Rimmer to listen to his explanation. Observing the match has the same effect as participating in practice matches, so you must carefully watch other students' matches and think about your moves in advance. Some faces are extremely worried and difficult to hide, so Rimmer also reminds me not to worry and just show my best. The first is the match between Burden Zegard and Dorian. Hearing his name, Burden calmly stepped onto the lake, but his opponent was not so eloquent. Dorian's trembling right hand now spoke timidly, but Dorian looked as if he hadn't slept for many years. He looked both sad and tired and asked to surrender right here, making Burden and Rimmer not understand what was going on. It hadn't even started yet. It turned out that it wasn't because he was afraid of Burden's aura that Dorian held his stomach and groaned, because he didn't feel well. Yesterday I had a cold, so I still had chills and pain all over my body, and last night I couldn't sleep anymore. It's true, teacher. Quintessence immediately started making noise. If this boy was my subordinate, I would have beheaded him on the spot, but Rayon was not surprised at all. From before it all started, I knew he would do that. Rimmer also saw the boy's withdrawn expression, so he approached to remind him. Dorian, you should try to fight Burden, because you will definitely learn something from him, even if you lose. At this time, the boy was still pale but had to listen. The lesson about having both a stomachache and a cold was finally debunked by the teacher like that. But as expected, after just a few moves, Dorian was lying on the ground. Repeating the previous sentence, I surrendered. While looking at Burden, he did not lose a single ounce of strength, nor did he shed a single drop of sweat. But Rimmer discovered that this kid's emotions were being overwhelmed, so he gently advised that he still couldn't control his emotions. If I had fought properly, I would have defeated him in 5 moves. Who knows? Burden was very unhappy with his attitude and the story of Dorian always running away from strong opponents. Teacher told me I could do it, but if I fought back I might have been able to last longer. But Dorian lying on the ground no longer had any fighting spirit. Everything was simply too scary for him. Okay, let's talk about advising this blue-haired kid later. Rimmer continues to chant. The next match is Rhinon versus Kren. Contrary to Rhinon's characteristic arrogance, Kren clasped the sword in his hand warily. As soon as she entered the match, the blonde girl swung her sword strongly to gain the initiative towards Rhinon. Looking up at the right that was about to strike him, Rhinon's right arm jerked diagonally and easily knocked the sword out of Kren's hand. You little devil, stop destroying other people's moves. Why did you even send the sword flying like that? Looking at the sword being thrown a long way from Kren, Rimmer gently shouted, Okay. You are too nervous and have to relax more when holding the sword, Kren. As for Rhinon, the counterattack was nice, but Auror still couldn't last until the end of the match. That was Rimmer's comment. It sounded very simple, so Rhinon just gave me one sentence to answer. As the afternoon wore on, the fight between the guys at the end of the line made the atmosphere even more heated. From now on, there has been a continuous clanging sound, and the students here also understand that they are the last ones and should wait longer than others. It's natural to fight hard, that's part of it. The other part is because Martha is so energetic. She swung her sword continuously to force Rayon to reveal her weakness. An arrogant and confident smile bloomed on Martha's lips from the moment the match began. While Rayon did not show any interest other than his sensitive eyes staring at every move of his opponent, as he slashed his sword down once, Rayon gently blocked it with his diagonal sword. However, Martha's strength is not the same. She easily pushed Rayon's hand away, not allowing him to have the advantage of cutting a single line towards her. Next was a swing from Martha's right wing. Unfortunately, this part was guessed by Rayon. He turned his hand and slammed the blade against her sword, then heard a whooshing sound in his ears. Martha had to jump back to avoid the horizontal slash Rayon had just made. Landing lightly on the ground about 3 meters away from him, Martha had a smile on his face filled with amusement. I didn't expect that he could block all of my attacks. and I have to admit that he is very talented, but talent is just that. Limited to swordsmanship only. Looking at Rayon's extremely calm expression, Martha was even more motivated to swing her sword and loudly declare that a half-hearted warrior like him who is not good at using aura will never shine. Saying that, she raised her sword and pushed the aura that was always moving in her body and wrapped around her sword, pressing a little down on her foot that was gaining momentum. Martha suddenly rushed forward towards Rayon, preparing to slash down with the sword that she herself believed would surely be the blow that would bring end and humiliation to Rayon. The clanging sound when the two swords touched each other rang out along with the pressure being bounced back, causing the dirt and rocks on the training ground to shoot out up to 2 meters away. Even though she trained her muscles regularly, Rayon had to admit that the blow Martha was receiving was extremely heavy. She hadn't used all her strength yet, so she grinned, "Oh my, it's better now, but we'll have to wait and see how long it can last." Because there was a lot of aura inside Martha's body and the ability to use aura was more important to her than swordsmanship, Martha believed that after 7 months, his ability would only create a small amount of aura. Like a pea, there's no way he could compete with a swordsman who has gone through a lot of practice like you. While holding down a sword, Martha warned, "If you don't surrender, I will crush your bones with the next blow. But to do that, we have to see if Rayon agrees." He responded with a trick and then nonchalantly reminded her, always talking about her talent, and it seemed like she and the rest of the family looked up to her. "The referee is so talented." Those words didn't affect Martha. She chuckled, "You're bothered because you don't have talent, right? That's why I want to show you what talent can really do." He coldly looked at that girl, aura rising all over his body. "If so, I will show you the opposite, which is that talent is not the most important thing." The aura of golden fire gradually rose onto the sword held in Rayon's right hand, instantly making the space around him brighten, attracting Martha's stunned gaze. How could she have dreamed that this weak person in front of her was using the technique of 10,000 fires, one fire, creating an aura carrying the heat of a burning fire on his sword? Mata looked at that thing without blinking, wondering what that fire was. This danger was definitely not ordinary fire. There was something hidden behind these things too. The sparkling golden light scattered in the air made her feel so beautiful and chilling. In Rayon's hands, its horror level increases even more. Martha didn't really want to, but she herself felt like she had just swallowed a lot of saliva to calm herself, clasping her hands on the hilt of her sword. Martha responded, "I guess I have to be serious." The black crystal-shaped aura, the ultimate point, surrounded the young girl's sword, causing her hair to flutter. In response to Rayon's cultivating technique, the ultimate point is the move where Martha accumulates aura at a single point. He knew that at this age, if she could use aura at exactly one point, Martha was truly talented. Next, Martha would probably put all her strength into the next attack to defeat him, holding up the sword warily and looking into her opponent's eyes. Martha had to admit that Rayon was very strong, but she did not believe that the blonde man in front of her could block this move of hers. Kicking her feet with momentum, she rushed out to where she had just stood, rushing towards the blonde boy and slashing down decisively, carrying her dark aura. At the same time as Rayon swiped his right sword across, directly and touching each other, his black aura and golden fire aura rushed out like wind, gradually causing the ground to make clicking sounds all the way to his feet. Of the audience watching, they had to step back immediately. "The ground is cracking, what's going on?" Not only the ground but also the wind and dust are rising to the point where you can't see who's in front of you. A moment later, when everything began to calm down, we saw that the sword had been broken in half and the owner of that sword, Martha, was lying on the ground, with a large crack on her back. She seemed to have fainted. The students behind wanted to hold back and couldn't, because Rayon had really won. How could Martha's aura lose? Of course, Rayon wouldn't explain, but he gently observed that even though Martha was unconscious, she still clenched her fists. That night in the main building of the Zeegard family, of course the news was transmitted to the Lord in this place. Glenn was sitting on his bright yellow chair, contemplating. "Rayon really defeated Martha," Rimmer excitedly said. "Yes. She completely defeated Martha. Even though Martha had trained her aura for 4 years before, it was unbelievable." Glenn still frowned tightly as he thought, The fire I saw that day was truly beautiful, like a flower made of fire. Its power greatly exceeded its size. And I'm sure everyone in the family already knows about this, so please guide the boy, don't let him become arrogant. Of course, that's Rimmer's job. Without the Lord telling him to laugh, he understood. As for Martha, it was the complete opposite. From what Rimmer knew, she seemed very shocked. The skin wound was nothing to worry about, but the psychological problem was definitely the biggest problem. Martha is definitely very shocked by this. Rimmer can't interfere with her pride and can only hope that she gets over it quickly. Martha was traumatized, so Rayon had time to take care of the flowers outside. However, the more beautiful the flowers were, the more annoying the curse from the flower emperor behind them was. Hey, can you be a little more careful? Be more careful or I'll freeze you too. As he filled the flower branches with soil, he frowned and felt uncomfortable. This damn demon could not do anything but made a loud noise like an empty barrel. As soon as she heard him cursing her, the quintessence immediately blurted out. All of this happened because of that person's ability to resist elements. Thinking back, Rayon knew the night after he had beaten her.